He ruled the world's most powerful empire, until his own mind turned against him. One moment he was giving orders to generals. The next, he was talking to trees, convinced he was speaking to angels. But was it really madness? Or was something, or someone, trying to silence the king? In the late 1780s, King George III was at the peak of his reign. He had survived assassination attempts, led Britain through revolutions, and watched over an empire that stretched across continents. But behind the gilded palace doors, something terrifying was unfolding. It started subtly, a sudden burst of energy, long rambling speeches that lasted for hours. Then came the paranoia, the screaming, the fits. He once talked non-stop for over 50 hours. His doctors wrote, "He foams at the mouth. His eyes are wild. His words make no sense." The palace tried to keep it hidden. They blamed stress, then nerves, then something they called melancholy. But soon, they couldn't hide it anymore. The king was strapped to a chair. He was howling in agony, and the court had a choice to make. Do they declare the king unfit to rule, or wait for a man who might never return to sanity? As the crown slipped from his grasp, one man began moving in the shadows, a man who saw the king's madness not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. As King George's mind slipped further into chaos, a quiet power struggle began inside Windsor Castle. At the center of it all, his son, George Augustus Frederick, the Prince of Wales. He was everything his father despised: lavish, reckless, drowning in debt, and parading mistresses in public. And yet, with every outburst, every sleepless night, every report of the king talking to the dead, the prince came closer to power. The whispers in Parliament grew louder. "The king is mad! The prince must rule!" But there was a problem. King George refused to let go. Even in his madness, he clung to the throne. One night, court physicians found him trying to shake hands with an empty chair. The next morning, he insisted he had just spoken with the ghost of his long-dead ancestor. Behind closed doors, the prince was furious. He began rallying his allies, preparing a legal coup to have his own father declared insane, so he could be crowned Prince Regent. But not everyone believed the king was gone for good. Some claimed his madness came and went, that when lucid he was still sharp, still dangerous. And then, just as the prince was ready to strike, King George did something no one expected. He stood up, looked his doctors in the eye, and said, "I am well, and I intend to rule." But was it a return to sanity, or the final act of a madman? The court froze. Was the king back? He spoke with calm precision. Dressed with royal dignity, he attended council meetings and signed documents with steady hands. The doctors were baffled. The prince was enraged. The plan to declare him regent destroyed in a single morning. But behind the facade of recovery, the cracks remained. He sang at odd hours, laughed when no one was speaking. He wrote letters to people who had died decades earlier. Still, the king had one weapon left: the public. He strolled through gardens, smiling for crowds, letting rumors of his miraculous recovery spread. Parliament hesitated. Was it truly madness, or just a monarch under stress? But then, another turn. George began rambling again. His words made no sense. He spoke for hours without stopping, once for over 50 straight. Physicians now said it with certainty. "He is not well. This is beyond melancholy or grief. This is derangement." And yet no one dared to dethrone him, until a secret journal emerged, hidden in the king's study. Hundreds of pages of strange thoughts, rants, obsessions. His handwriting grew erratic, and his final entry read, "They are watching me through the walls, even my son." The prince read it in silence, then turned to his advisers and said, "Prepare the papers. He will not see the next throne come dawn." But fate had one more twist to offer. January of 1811. After years of delay, scandal, and whispered meetings in candlelit halls, Parliament finally passed the Regency Act. Prince George became Prince Regent. But even as he took power, he ordered the curtains of Windsor Castle remain shut. His father, the king in name only, was now a ghost within palace walls, locked away in Windsor, no longer allowed to rule, no longer allowed to roam. He sat in silence, or in screaming fits. His hair had turned white, his sight gone. He spoke to walls, shouted at God, and claimed he saw angels. And his most loyal servant, Colonel Taylor, recorded it all. One day, he found the king sobbing, not because of pain, not because of politics, but because he couldn't find his favorite clock. "The time, Taylor," the king muttered. "The time keeps slipping. Where is it going?" Years passed. The world moved on. Napoleon rose. Britain changed. And still, the mad king wandered the empty halls of Windsor. Until one day in 1820, he stopped speaking altogether. But before his final silence, he muttered one last phrase. "I have seen the throne, and it is empty." Was it nonsense or prophecy? By the spring of 1820, King George III had become a myth, a monarch the people no longer saw, only heard about in whispers, blind, deaf, mad. He hadn't spoken a full sentence in years. He was no longer a ruler, no longer a father, no longer even himself. But the kingdom remembered, and so did those who had once served him. Colonel Taylor, now aged and weary, still visited him each morning, still said, "Good day, Your Majesty," even if there was no reply. But then, on the night of January 29th, 1820, the palace fell into stillness. The king, they said, had finally stopped breathing. No final words, no attendants by his side, no farewell to the crown he once wore so proudly. He died alone, in silence, a king, buried under the weight of his own mind. They buried him at Windsor, beside his beloved wife, and the kingdom moved on. But the legacy of George III did not. For centuries they painted him as mad, dangerous, unfit. But now, modern historians say it may have been a disease, porphyria, a genetic condition that can twist the mind and body. He wasn't cursed. He wasn't evil. He was sick, and no one knew how to save him. He was the last British monarch to lose his mind on the throne, and maybe the first to lose it all so publicly. The crown survived, but the man beneath it was never truly seen again.